I think the first thing, if you're thinking about writing a book, that you should think about is that moment where you actually hold the book you wrote in your hands. And what does that moment feel like to you? And if that's not exciting enough, then I would say don't write a book. Like that, like ultimately you really need, because this is not easy, you need that moment as such a motivating force, and it is for me.
Hello, and welcome to the Tech Pubcast, a behind-the-scenes look at what it really takes to write and publish a technical book. I'm your host, Jess Haberman. I'm a literary agent, publishing consultant, and former acquisitions editor with nearly 20 years of experience publishing books. And so today, I'm thrilled to welcome Ryan Dolley to the podcast. Hello, Ryan. Do you want to share a brief introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. First of all, I want to say it's awesome that you're doing this, and I'm so thrilled that you asked me to participate. So I'm Ryan Dolley. I'm an independent advisor, author, and content creator, primarily focused on the analytics space. So I've been in business intelligence and analytics now for 16 years. And in that time, I've done pretty much everything you can do. So I've worked for huge companies like Oracle. I've worked for a 5-person startup. I've been on data teams. I've led data teams. And now I'm writing a book about it as well. So kind of, every hat you can wear, I've worn. And I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about what it's like to be a first-time author.
That's amazing. So, Ryan, you mentioned you're writing your very first book, AI Analytics for Business Intelligence. Want to tell us a little bit more about the project, like how you kind of decided on this topic and decided to launch yourself into this book writing process?
Yeah, well, I've always wanted to write a book. I actually majored in creative writing and theater in my undergraduate studies, and so I always had this idea that I would be a writer. When I was a kid, I thought I would be like fantasy novels. And then it was like, oh no, I'm going to be a Broadway playwright. And once I got into the tech field, the idea was always still in my head that maybe I would have something to contribute in that respect. And so, the book itself is about using LLMs and AI in order to build analytics applications, essentially. And the idea, I think you came to me and said, hey, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, boy, have I ever. And then we kind of kicked around some ideas about, well, what kind of book might actually be appealing to people right now? And this was one of the topics I threw out, and I think you latched onto and said, like, yes, this is the best one. I mean, it's really timely. I will tell you, when I talk about the book, I go to a lot of conferences. I get lots of people coming up to me saying, my gosh, I really want to learn how to do this. When is the book coming out? How can I learn more? And so I think it's a good topic at the right time, which is maybe one of the top considerations for what you should write about.
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to think about like when we first met, but I think it must have been at, data conferences over the years. But, I think what I love about
It was Data Day Texas, I'm pretty sure.
Data Day Texas, yeah. But the folks that attend those conferences, they're really good people to know if you're interested in learning about what it's like to write a book in this space. But yeah, I remember just seeing that, I think this is a unique path into publishing because a lot of times, and I think like the general conception is someone has a really good book idea and they're interested in writing, or they're a good writer, and then they go publish a book. And that's not really always the case. And although you are a good writer and you've been writing a while, I latched onto you because of your author platform, because you were already doing all of the kind of promotional, you're good at self-promoting, and you're a good speaker. You had your podcast, so you were already building out your author platform, your audience. And that is such a huge part of publishing that if you can get that part, then what you write about is still important, but it's man, the author platform part is so the hardest. So talk to me about how, I imagine you didn't go into building a podcast and stuff to be oh, because this will make me a good author one day. But how did you think about how you develop your personal brand and all this sort of activity around?
Yeah, I've always been driven to create, I think. I'm a creative person. I think data attracts a lot of very logical, systems people, and I do have that side of my personality, and you have to have that to be good at this, but I've always been a creative person. You go back to 2013, I think, and I was working on a data team, and I decided I wanted to get a new job. And I thought to myself, okay, I want to do something cool. How can I get on the radar of someone who's looking to do something cool? And so it was 2013. What I did is I started a blog to try to get noticed, right? And it was about Cognos, which was the BI tool that I was an expert in back in the day, and it worked. I got hired by one of the top IBM consulting partners in North America to do that kind of work. And so I learned pretty early on that sharing what you know in public is actually a path to building a career. And I've just been applying that ever since. So as new things came along, I just kind of kept rolling into it. I think the podcast in particular and the YouTube show came about because I was bored. It was like it launched during COVID, I think, like so many other podcasts did, or maybe a little before. Actually, the channel started before that. It was a tutorials channel for technical topics for business intelligence developers. And then during COVID, it was like, well, why don't we do a podcast too? And then you just keep rolling. So if you develop this muscle, new things will come along. Substack came along. I now have a Substack, right? LinkedIn suddenly became a place where data people were talking. So I have a presence on LinkedIn. And it's just a muscle that you build up for two reasons. One, if you find it enjoyable, which I do, I like learning stuff and sharing what I know. It's just like something I like doing. And then two, like it's really good for you. You need to be out there, especially now. You need to be out there building a personal brand. And if you're listening to this, you may be thinking like, gosh, that sounds so lame. And sometimes it is really lame. But from a career perspective, it's just more and more and more important, whether you want to write a book or not. What you said earlier, Jess, like, especially if you want to write a book, it's very important.
It's super important, I think, to craft your voice, like to build out your sort of as an expert in whatever, whether it's tech or something else. But to be able to kind of craft your unique voice and your unique perspective when there's just so much like generic AI generated content out there. It's just like, I think, a human skill that everyone needs to, I think, lean into. And that can be uncomfortable for folks who aren't used to kind of like speaking loudly and sort of being out there with your voice. But people really respect it so much. They value it. They can tell when something is real. And comes from deep expertise. So yeah, I completely agree. Like it's a skill set to hone. So let's talk about the kind of the end-to-end process. You're not at the end of your process yet by any means, but let's talk a little bit about how long you've been writing. For folks who aren't familiar with the process, is you start by putting together a proposal, which is a pretty in-depth document that really pitches your book for a commercial audience and explains sort of who you're writing for and what the competitive market is, and it makes a persuasive argument that, you know, you're the right person to write this book. This is the right time to do it, and gets into sort of an outline of what you plan to cover. So how long is the process? How much further do you have to go?
Yeah, I think if I recall, you and I started working together last summer. On a proposal. And if you're getting into this for the first time, I think it's important to understand exactly what you said, which is the proposal and the pitch and all of that is actually a ton of work. Yeah. You're not just going to go and say, hey, I'm an expert in topic X and I would like to write a book, and they're going to do one Zoom call with you and say, oh, this person seems cool, let's do it. You really need to do the legwork of justifying why your book should exist. And that's going to include planning out the content in a much more detailed way than I think I expected. And of course that can change. You're going to start writing, and you know, my topic's about AI. I mean, stuff has happened between when we proposed the book and now that has made some of the things I intended to talk about irrelevant and made other topics really important. You're going to have to do market research on why your topic has an audience, and you're going to have to learn what other books exist already that might address that audience or talk about your topic to justify to the publisher why they should invest in your proposal. So that process alone, I think, took a couple months of us going back and forth on that. And then from there, we went into so I think early fall, maybe, or late summer, we went into pitching publishers. We ended up settling on Wiley, signed that contract. And so I really started writing in earnest in September. And once you sign a contract, you're going to have deliverables. So in my case, it was first chapter, first half, and then full book kind of deadlines. And I've been in the thick of it ever since. As of this recording at the end of April, my last chapter is due to my editor at the end of August. And then from there we go into, well, I guess I don't know a ton about what we go into because I haven't done it yet. You're the expert in that, Jess.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the timeline we're on. And I think it's a pretty typical timeline. My understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, especially for a first-time author, like if you've done this many times, maybe you might have a more aggressive timeline. But I think in my case, it's a first-time author. They're not going to come to you and say, "Oh, you have 4 months to get this done," right? Because you don't know what you're doing. And I will tell you, if you want to get into this, you don't know what you're doing, and you're going to learn. You're going to learn by doing it. So it's very exciting, and it's been a very cool process. I will tell you that.
I think this is relevant for anyone who's writing about tech and especially about AI. Is how do you settle on what topics to include, how in depth to get when you've still got months before the book actually reaches your audience, and then you hope that it's relevant enough for several more years if you can. So how do you kind of hone in on the right level of detail?
That is such a good question. I will say, first of all, that I got this, I think, wrong to start. So I think I was probably a little too detailed with the chapters I turned in to my editor, Kelly, to start. And he made that very clear to me. So, what I would say is, look, for a technical book, this is a very fine balance. You need to be detailed enough that people who are reading it feel like they're getting useful technical guidance. But if you're overly detailed, one, it's hard to read. And two is you do run into the situation where you advocate specific techniques, or you say, use this code or use this library. Like, don't do that, because that stuff is going to be irrelevant maybe by the time the book publishes. So you need to take a step back and think about the principles behind what you're writing and try to teach those, I think is the key, especially if you're writing about AI. I mean, we're in a weird place because the principles are not at all settled. So on the one hand, sometimes I think about it and I have moments where I'm like, how can I possibly write something that is still going to be useful in a couple of years? But the flip side is I think to myself, well, this is also the opportunity to be the person who helps define what is useful in a couple of years. And so the only way to do that is to teach people the principles and how to think about it, and not to prescriptively give them the solution to technical problems, because that just changes too fast. I just turned in an edited version of chapter 1 where my editor was like, please cut 50% of these words. I am a writer who loves cutting. That's my favorite thing to do. And so I did, right? I was like, yeah, a lot of what I'm saying in chapter 1 either belongs in other chapters or it's too detailed. I need to be teaching this is the first significant chapter of the book, and it needs to be about a high level introduction to the way to think about these topics, right?
Right.
And ultimately the whole book probably should be like that.
Yeah, and it's so hard to write early chapters early because you don't really know, like, to write an introduction. I would often tell folks, please wait until the end, because you don't know what your book's going to be about. Yeah, you think you know. So to be able to introduce kind of the rest of your book when you haven't even done that, you haven't gotten into the meat of the chapters yet, that's always a good tip, is like save your introduction for later. But I think it's also one of those other things I would notice frequently with technical writers is like they know they're writing for a technical audience, so they speak that language. They speak a technical language. They use a lot of jargon, when like really that's absolutely not what you want to do. You want your language to be readable to anyone, even someone less technical, especially now where a lot of non-technical folks are getting into the kind of more technical disciplines with AI tooling and things like that. How do you think about other ways to make sure that your voice is readable and that the concepts are easier to understand? Yeah,
well, one of the things that I find that I have done is, and this works for me, is to write too much. Then you can look at it and say, okay, what can I get rid of here? And when it comes to making the technical concepts easy to understand, I think what I've found is that my first pass on a chapter is too detailed. And then I look at it and I ask myself, like, does someone really need to understand this particular point in order to be successful, right? And okay, so the other thing that I'm thinking about is, who is reading this book, right? You can't assume they know too much. And so your first instinct is going to be, that means I have to explain everything. That's actually wrong, right?
Right.
You should be explaining less and really drilling down into the most important concepts for them to understand. And then trust, like, your job is to give them a foundation. It's not possible to read a book and walk away an expert. Expertise comes from doing, right? Your job is to give them that foundation so that they can go out and realize the things that they don't know and, make the mistakes and do all that stuff, right? You can't give them everything wrapped up in a box in the form of your book that they're going to need to know. It's not possible. So like, what are the first principles that they need to understand, right? I define, here's some concept you need to know. And then I'm like, you know what? Actually, you don't need to know it. Or maybe you do need to know it, but you don't need to know it from my book, right? Yeah. My book can be the thing that sets you on the path to realizing you need to know this 6 months from now when you've been doing this kind of work, right? And then there are other resources and other avenues for them to learn that sort of stuff. So this is one of the hardest things about writing a technical book is figuring out what to put in. You really cannot assume a high level of sophistication from your reader. Your instinct to explain everything because of that is actually backwards.
Right. Yeah, I think you asked a good question. Who is reading my book? So kind of an emphasis on the who. Who are they? What is their role? How technical are they? Like understanding kind of their persona. But also who is reading my book? Like why is the book what they're reading? Why are they choosing that format? And what can they get out of a book that they can't get somewhere else? They're going to go to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever to ask what tools to use, what Python package to download, like whatever, that sort of thing. But they want, a more in-depth understanding. So that they can get answers to some of the simple like tooling questions, things like that from another source, because that's where they're going to go naturally anyway. How do you dive into kind of more of the color that you want to provide more of your kind of own perspective and expertise? So I think that's really important to keep in mind.
Well, that's really, I think you hit the nail on the head. Why get a book when you can go to YouTube and you can go to YouTube for the technical tutorial? No book can compete with YouTube for a technical tutorial. Where YouTube struggles is to teach people how to think, right? Reading is that long attention, when you want to devote a long attention to something in order to really understand it. That's what the point of the book. And so that's what the book needs to teach people ultimately, right? Is yes, you can give technical examples. Here's an example of how to do this, and you can get a little technical with it, but it needs to be in service of teaching them how to think.
It's so smart. YouTube is the teach me how to do, and a book is teach me how to think.
Yeah.
I think that's really...
And listen, if you're a new author, like, do both. Yeah. That's what I do, right? I have a YouTube channel, right? Write the book, and then when they Google, well, how do I do this technical thing? Have the YouTube video for them too, right? Do both.
And they'll trust you. So it sounds like you're enjoying the process. So tell me, be honest. Tell me, what do you enjoy? And then on the flip side, what's the most challenging part about writing a book?
Yeah, I do enjoy it. Like, this is really hard. Even if you're a skilled writer and you're good at writing, say, blog posts. I've had a blog now for 13 years in one form or another. And, this is not like writing a blog. So it's very challenging. It's very rewarding. Like the most recent edits I made to that chapter 1, and I recognized when I turned in the chapter 1, I even said, when we were talking to the editor, I was like, this chapter is I don't think it works. It's too long and dry and technical. And they were like, well, since you're saying that, we almost don't even have to read it. We know you're right. But uncovering that sort of thing and then thinking it through and solving the problem, in a lot of ways, writing a book, if you're a technical person, you often like solving puzzles, and writing a good chapter in a way is a puzzle, and solving it's very satisfying. So that part's great. The challenge is just making sure that you're hitting your deadlines and progressing and doing the right balance. It's really easy to get caught up in doing research or exploring a topic. At some point you just got to write. Like, writing will teach you what you need to know in order to progress. And there are times when, a couple days ago I was working on a chapter, and I was just like, I literally can't think about this anymore. Mm-hmm. Like I've hit my limit. I'm trying to write a sentence. I'm trying to wrap up this paragraph. I can't do it. I got to walk away. So knowing when to do that, like, writing is not the kind of thing that you can brute force. At least I can't. Like, you have a certain amount of attention for it to do a good job. If I've been writing for 3 hours and I've hit that point, the actual prose that I wrote is not going to be good. And I'm going to have to go back and rework that section, So that's a balancing act. You need to recognize that so that there's not inexplicably this 4-paragraph section of your book that sucks. Like you need to note, hey, I need to go back and redo that because it was my brain was fried when I wrote it. I mean, these are some of the things that I'm running into.
Yeah. Do you have a standard routine in terms of like you work better in the mornings or in the evenings or do you work in like short spurts or long spurts? Like, what works best for you?
I tend to work, I tend to get into the zone and then I can knock out a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as far as time of day, I really would wish it was like I got my cup of coffee and I just started banging out the pages first thing in the morning. But I find that that's pretty hard. Like sometime after lunch I find I can really zone in and just crush it, or like late afternoon. Now the challenge becomes like my kids often come home and then there's like I'm in my office writing and there's just total chaos going on outside the doors of the office. Finding time to do it too. Like that's the other thing. You hear about these legendary writers over the years. I think Arthur C. Clarke, science fiction author, famously wrote the exact same way 7 days a week for 50 years, right? Mm-hmm. If you can be Arthur C. Clarke, congratulations. If you can't, at some point you just need to find time to do it, right? If like I've got 40 minutes, there's this part of chapter 3 I think I make progress on. I'm just going to spend 40 minutes on it. I'm also like, I do this and then I'm like an independent advisor. I'm running this self-employed business at the same time. So balancing all that's hard, but ultimately getting the book done to me is the most important thing. Having the book, all the things I want to do career-wise, they all flow out of doing the best job I can on this.
Let's talk a little bit about your expectations for what you hope will unlock with a book. And then, we can come back in a year and see how that's going. But, kind of what's your intent, what were your career, your publishing and career goals around, what you want this book to do for you? Why is having a book so valuable?
I think the first thing, if you're thinking about writing a book that you should think about is that moment where you actually hold the book you wrote in your hands. And what does that moment feel like to you? And if that's not exciting enough, then I would say don't write a book. Like that, like ultimately you really need, because this is not easy, you need that moment as such a motivating force, and it is for me. Okay, so career-wise, I think so my book hasn't come out, but I've been assured by my author friends that you should not expect to retire off of the royalties from your technical book. And so that's not really what it's about. The money that the book generates, a technical book generates, I think most of the time is pretty modest. What you can get out of it, it's validating for your expertise in your area of focus. So especially if you're doing it through a major publisher like Wiley, that's a signal to people that this person is a pretty serious thinker in this space. And then in 2026, how do you make money off of a book? You sell the book, yes, but I think what I'm planning on doing is all the monetization stuff around the book. So I have my Substack. I have not turned on monetization on the Substack yet, but after the book comes out, I plan on doing that. So that becomes a revenue stream, right? The book will hopefully raise the notoriety of the podcast. I take sponsorships on my podcast. So finding sponsorships, I'm hoping will be easier and I will be able to charge a higher rate for those sponsorships. Presenting at conferences will be a huge one. If you're writing a book and you want to monetize the book, and I hate to just talk about monetization, but like, look, we all got to feed ourselves here.
Right.
Like going to conferences is going to be a major way to do it, both to help push book sales, but also people get paid to speak at conferences. And one of the major ways to get on the radar of conferences that this is someone we should pay to come in and speak is to have a book from a major publisher that you've published, right? And then suddenly it goes from, oh, can I please speak at your conference to, here's the contract, right? That's the difference. So having all of that stuff, as kind of a solo entrepreneur influencer person, I think having the book is a key piece of the whole puzzle.
Yeah. I think that's a really important way to think about it because there's the misconception that like you're going to make a lot of money on your book, which is not true.
Yeah.
And then there's also the misconception that like books don't make any money, but they like the conglomeration of all the activity, in all the ways that you can promote yourself, the ways you can repurpose content in other ways, the way it elevates your profile to enable you to get other opportunities, the way you can bundle your book in with conference fees so that like suddenly they have to pay for 100 books because like it's just part of your conference fees and now you're just spreading your word out there. And then that's opening up another customer for you. Like it really escalates, especially as you continue to build more and more content. You can look at folks like Matt Harrison does this extremely well. Like he's got a lot of books, he's got training, he's got conferences. He just kind of stacks everything on. And then he's got this whole, he's got like this huge platform with all the content that he produces. So once you start to do, like, you really kind of build up a critical mass of content, then you do really see some money out of that, And it's a lot of work.
Exactly.
But it's fun.
Even just to get people to buy the book, you have to be doing that stuff. One of the misconceptions about publishing a book, I think, is that going through a major publisher, they're going to do all this stuff for me. They're going to advertise the book, and they're going to, not likely, right? I mean, they'll do a little, right? But it's on you to get the word out about the book. And that's one of the reasons why I think our proposal was interesting to Wiley, was because they could read our proposal, check me out online, and say, okay, this is someone who is going to go out there and try to move units. And at the end of the day, that's what they care about. I think about that when I'm writing. Ultimately, I want to write a book that people want to buy, And so at the end of the day, everyone wins if you write that book. Your readers win, you win, the publisher wins. Like that's the main thing you need to be focused on. And a huge part of it, it's like this virtuous cycle, right? You do all this other stuff to raise the profile of the book, and then the book raises your profile so you can do other stuff. But I would say my advice, and again, my book hasn't come out yet, so we'll talk in a year and see how much of this is BS. But my advice is like, you need to be prepared to do all that as an author going into it. I would say, like, a great example in my mind too, I'm friends with Joe Reese. Like, Joe is out there promoting, right? Joe is always out there promoting. And that works. Writing the book and then thinking I got with Wiley or I got with O'Reilly, and so my job is done. It's not going to succeed.
100% correct. Yeah. It's really just the start of you, like, getting the word out there, because, like, as much as a publisher can do to promote you, your network is your audience. So so they really are just trying to work through you to get your word out there to the people that you already know and to their friends, to get it recommended. Like, that is the best network. The publisher's, social media following does not matter. It's
Exactly.
your own network, and yet just getting in their face. Joe's a great example of someone who's constantly talking to his audience, like constantly sharing his opinion. Like, I never hear people complain that, like, there's too much Joe Reese in the world. Like, he's just
Exactly.
like, you can unsubscribe if you're not interested, but otherwise, like, he has a huge following because people care about what he thinks. So I recommend every author think, a lot of folks don't like talking about themselves, but, like, get over it. Because that is the way that you get your work out there, that you help people. So it does take practice, and it means just speaking to your people, to your audience, to your blog, your YouTube, however you best do it, is to keep your voice out there. So I think you've already started that, Ryan.
That's I think about it every day. So, and I do think it's the most important thing. And then the book is just one tool in the toolkit of all that process. But the nice thing is, and I can't wait till I can actually hold it, right? All the other stuff you do, your blog and your YouTube videos and whatever you're into, like that's all stuff on a screen, having a book on the shelf behind me that's like, I wrote that. Like, that's going to be awesome.
Ryan's book will be out. I don't have a firm publication date. I don't probably end of the year.
Shooting for April 2027.
April 2027. So we've got a ways to go. But
Yep.
Stay tuned. Like, we're going to have, we'll certainly be reminding everyone to pre-order it when it's available.
Yep.
But what else? What else do you have to plug? Where can folks find you? Where can they kind of hear from you more often?
Yeah, where can't they find me? So LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn, Ryan Dolley. My blog, my Substack rather, superdatablog.substack.com. If you're interested in following the book in particular, and then just general updates on what's going on, both for practitioners and leaders in BI and analytics, I would suggest the blog is a good thing to follow. The Super Data Brothers YouTube channel, which is a podcast I do with my brother Eric. Follow us there. I think that's it. I'm on everything, so there's TikToks and whatever, I mean, if you look me up, you'll find me.
Absolutely. Ryan, thanks so much for being an early guest on the Tech Pubcast. Really happy to have you. Really great to work with you. Excited to see the book and see it in your hands finally. And if you're interested in hearing more conversations like this, stay tuned. We've got plenty more coming. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jess.